Go. Good day, everyone. Good day, sir. Let me introduce myself first. My name is Nicole Palwa, first year from BSCS Block A. For this moment, I want to lend your ears, for I will going to tackle the global economic institutions. And here are the key topics for my report. Short history of the institution, rationale for its creation or establishment, their role in the global economy, benefits and limitations. In order to understand our world today, we need to understand the principal global economic institutions that provide the foundation and structural support of the world economy. This does not mean that the day of the nation state is over, nor that the institutions have become so successful that a brave new world of supranationalism is about to dawn. Rather, it means that the creative institutional experiments in international cooperation, born out of the ashes of World War II, have become so well established that there is a tendency to take them for granted. Having such institutions in place is a major asset for mankind in dealing with growing economic integration and increasingly pervasive interdependence with its inherent vulnerabilities. For better understanding, I want to show you some definition of institution from different perspectives. According to Hodgson, essentially, institutions are durable systems of established and embedded social rules and conventions that structure social interactions. According to Scotter in 1981, quoted in Longlois, a social institution is a regularity in social behavior that is agreed to by all members of society, specifies behavior in specific recurrent situations, and is either self-policed or policed by some internal or external authority. According to North, institutions are rules, enforcement characteristics of rules, and norms of behavior that structure repeated human interaction. While according to King, institutions are repetitive patterns of interaction through which society undertakes certain functions. And lastly, according to Nibley and Nugent, wide sense, persistent groups of norms of behavior which serve collectively valued purposes, or in narrow sense of a set of rules to facilitate coordination via allowing expectations to form. History of institution. There are three principal international economic institutions of a universal character: the International Monetary Fund, the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. All three originated in wartime planning for a better economic future, although the GATT, or the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, was created later than the fund and the bank after the charter of the planned International Trade Organization, or the ITO, failed to enter into force. The planning took place against the background of the impoverishing economic policies of the 1930s and in the context of ambitious planning that led to the establishment of the universal political institution, the United Nations. The history of these institutions is thus short by historical standards. The economic institutions are based on the recognition that an interdependent world economy, national and international prosperity are inseparable. As befitting the purposes of these institutions, they are of universal scope, with a growing membership reflecting the common interest among states and hence the growth of community among them. They represent a potent force of attraction that has led to a diminishing number of non-members, a shrinking category that may be expected to disappear altogether. The universal economic institutions coexist with international economic organizations of a regional or more limited character that are more or less patterned after them or have overlapping or related functions, such as the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development or the OECD, the European Communities or the EC, the Bank for International Settlements or BIS, the regional development banks, and in the distinct or orbit around the Soviet Union, the Council of Mutual Economic Assistance or the CMEA. The three principal institutions, the Fund, the World Bank, and the JATT that started out sharing the broad unity of purpose of promoting national and international prosperity. They were to do so with a historical division of work among them. The fund was to promote a stable and open international monetary system, the World Bank economic growth through post-war reconstruction and development through productive investment, while the GATT would provide the framework for the establishment of an open international trading system. With the pursuit of prosperity being thus attended to, peace would be achieved through political cooperation institutionalized in the United Nations. The post-war reality was not kind of the grand design. In retrospect, it is easy to see the unforeseen conflicts, the design's flaws, and the imperfections of implementation, even if the issues involved in these judgments are still controversial. It would be mistaken, however, to discount the existing imperfect reality too harshly against the ultimate goals, because the future of these institutions and what can be made of them is still ahead of us. Their evolution to date illuminates the path ahead. The International Monetary Fund, or IMF, promotes international financial stability and monetary cooperation. It also facilitates international trade, promotes employment and sustainable economic growth, and helps to reduce global poverty. The IMF is governed by and accountable to its 190 member countries. The IMF was conceived in July 1944 at the United Nations Bretton Woods Conference in New Hampshire, in United States. The 44 countries in attendance sought to build a framework for international economic cooperation and avoid repeating the competitive currency devaluations that contributed to the Great Depression of the 1930s. The IMF's primary mission is to ensure the stability of the international monetary system. The system of exchange rates and international payments that enables countries and their citizens to transact with each other. Their founding and mission, providing loans to member countries that are experiencing actual or potential balance of payments problems, is a core responsibility of the IMF. Individual country adjustment programs are designed in close cooperation with the IMF and are supported by IMF financing. And ongoing financial support is dependent on effective implementation of these adjustments. In response to the global economic crisis in April 2009, the IMF strengthened its lending capacity and approved a major overhaul of its financial support mechanisms, with additional reforms adopted in subsequent years. These changes enhance the IMF's crisis prevention toolkit, bolstering the ability to mitigate contagion during systemic crisis and allowing it to better tailor instruments to meet the needs of individual member countries. Primary aims of International Monetary Funds or IMF are promote international monetary cooperation, facilitate the expansion and balanced growth of international trade, promote exchange stability, assist in the establishment of a multilateral system of payments, and make resources available with adequate safeguards to members experiencing balance of payments difficulties. Next is the World Bank. The World Bank is a central institution for the promotion of economic development. It is the leading source of lending for productive investment to countries that have not reached the stage of economic development, at which they are able to generate sufficient domestic savings for investment or obtain needed external financing on commercial terms. Its mission is thus different from the funds, being both broader and narrower at the same time. It is broader in that economic development is an open ended task, unlike the balance of payments adjustment that addresses temporary disturbances in the country's economic relations with the rest of the world. It is narrower in that once countries are able to generate savings or attract capital inflows without the need for the bank's assistance, they graduate, that is, cease to qualify for bank lending. Although, on graduation, the bank thus achieves its purpose to assist in the economic development of these countries. The countries may experience occasional balance of payments problems that may lead them to request the fund's assistance. The World Bank is oriented towards economic assistance programs, development programs, and structural adjustment programs meant to fight poverty. In relation to the World Bank, the IMF represents the primordial institution as a specialization and responsibility sphere in connection to the international financial monetary system. By its configuration and the arbitration of its functional architecture, the World Bank was meant to deal with structural problems. What the government of their respective country spent money on, the country's financial institutions, the labor force market, and trading policies. Next is the GATT. Although the GATT originated in the same context and period as the fund and the bank, its beginnings already foreshadowed difficulties ahead. The initial planning to establish an international trade organization or the ITO to implement the comprehensive provisions on commercial policies of the Havana Charter of 1948 did not succeed. Although the ITO did not thus come into existence, some of the provisions of the Havana Charter were agreed In 1947, during separate multilateral tariff negotiations to be implemented on a provisional basis in advance as the GATT, and as it turned out since then. As a result, the GATT, strictly speaking, is a general international agreement, but not an international organization like the Fund or Bank. It embodies a combination of a code of conduct on trade policies with schedules of tariff concessions built on the principle of unconditional most favored nation treatment, but given effect through bilateral reciprocity as a system of enforcement. World Trade Organization, or WTO, was formed in 1995 to replace the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, or the GATT, which was started in 1948. GATT was replaced by WTO because GATT was biased in favor of developed countries. WTO was formed as a global international organization dealing with the rules of international trade among countries. The main objective of WTO is to help the global organizations to conduct their businesses. WTO headquartered at Geneva, Switzerland, consists of 153 members and represents more than 97% of world trade. The main objectives of WTO are as follows: raising the standard of living of people, promoting full employment, expanding production and trade, and utilizing the world's resources optimally. Next is ensuring that developing and less developed countries have better share of growth in the world trade. And lastly, introducing sustainable development and balance, in which balanced growth of trade and environment goes together. The main functions of WTO are as follows: setting the framework for trade policies, reviewing the trade policies of different countries, providing technical cooperation to less developed and developing countries, setting a forum for addressing trade-related disputes among different countries, reducing the barriers to international trade, facilitating the implementation, administration, and operation of agreements, setting a negotiation forum for multilateral trade agreements, cooperating with the international institutions such as IMF and World Bank for making global economic policies, ensuring the transparency of trade policies, and lastly, conducting economic research and analysis. There are also advantages of WTO, and here are them. Promoting peace within nations. Leads to less trade disputes. WTO helps in creating international cooperation, peace, and prosperity among nations. Next is handling the disputes constructively. Helps in lesser trade conflicts. When the international trade expands, the chances of disputes also increase. WTO helps in reducing these trade disputes and tensions among nations. Implies that by promoting international trade, WTO helps consumers in gaining access to a large number of productions, or products rather. Next is encouraging good governance, accelerates the growth of a country. The rules formulated by WTO encourage good governance and discourage the unwise policies that lead to corruption in a country. And lastly, stimulating economic growth leads to more jobs and increase in income. The policies of WTO focus on reducing trade barriers among nations to increase the quantum of import and export. The challenge today is different in that the institutions exist and changes can be incremental. Evolution or reform of the existing institutional machinery, rather than basic new departures, take the form of responding to the accelerating integration of the world economy. Coordination of the institutions is similarly a gradual process, occurring more under pressure than by design. The pressure is exerted by historical forces as the effects of growing economic interdependence conflict with insufficiently coordinated economic policies. The international economic institutions feel the pressure, perceive it as a call to greater effectiveness, and find that effectiveness cannot be achieved without coordination. So, that's all. Thank you for the time you share with me listening to my report. God, God bless us all.